Margaret Lawson believed she had found comfort in Daniel Reyes, a charming younger man who promised companionship in her final years. But behind Daniel's warm smile was a calculated plan that would end in a courtroom, expose a trail of manipulation across multiple states, and reveal that their marriage was never about love, but about money, control, and a visa that came at the cost of her life. Margaret Lawson had spent most of her life in the same quiet Florida neighborhood. At 72, her days moved slowly and peacefully. The large white house she shared with her late husband now felt too big and too quiet. Family photos lined the hallway walls, and the garden outside remained carefully maintained, just as she and her husband had planned years ago. After his death, Margaret tried to keep herself busy. She volunteered at church events, attended local fundraisers, and joined community gatherings to avoid feeling alone. Her only son, Thomas, lived in another state and visited when he could, but most evenings ended with Margaret sitting alone in her living room, watching television in silence. It was at a small charity fundraiser that she first met Daniel Reyes. He stood out immediately. He was younger than most people there, well-dressed and polite. He introduced himself as someone new to the country, eager to work hard and build a future. He listened carefully whenever Margaret spoke, showing interest in her stories about her late husband and her years of teaching at the local school. His attention made her feel valued again. Over the next few weeks, Daniel began appearing at more community events. Soon he was visiting Margaret at home, offering to help with small repairs and yard work. He carried groceries inside and insisted on driving her to appointments. His kindness felt refreshing, and neighbors noticed how much brighter Margaret seemed. The age difference raised quiet concerns among some friends, but Margaret dismissed them. She believed she had found companionship when she needed it most. Within 6 months, their relationship moved quickly toward marriage, leaving the town both surprised and curious. After the wedding, small changes began to appear in Margaret's daily routine. At first, they seemed harmless. Daniel insisted on organizing her paperwork so she would not feel overwhelmed. He told her it was better if one person handled the bills to avoid mistakes. Margaret agreed, believing he was only trying to help. She had never been comfortable with online banking, and Daniel presented himself as more familiar with modern systems. Gradually, he gained full access to her accounts. He accompanied her to the bank and convinced her to add his name for emergency purposes. He explained that married couples should share everything. Margaret trusted him. She had no reason not to. Soon, Daniel began limiting her contact with certain friends. He suggested that some people were jealous of their marriage. He told her that too many visitors would exhaust her. Margaret, already sensitive about her age, started declining invitations. Church gatherings became less frequent. Phone calls from old friends went unanswered. Thomas noticed a shift during his next visit. The house felt tense. His mother appeared distracted and unsure about her finances when he casually asked about household expenses. She brushed off his concerns and assured him everything was fine. Daniel remained nearby during most conversations, speaking on her behalf whenever possible. Margaret's health also began to change. She complained of frequent dizziness and unusual fatigue. Daniel attributed it to stress and aging. He handled her medication and attended every doctor's appointment, often speaking first when medical questions were asked. To outsiders, Daniel appeared attentive and protective. But behind closed doors, control was tightening. Margaret's world was slowly shrinking, and she did not realize how dependent she had become. Winter arrived quietly that year, bringing cooler evenings and shorter days. Margaret's health had grown weaker over the previous months. She often seemed pale and unsteady on her feet. Daniel told neighbors she was simply adjusting to new medications and the natural effects of aging. Few questioned him. He continued presenting himself as a devoted husband, always at her side. One evening, emergency services were called to the house after Margaret was found unconscious at the bottom of the staircase. Daniel reported that he had heard a loud noise and discovered her lying on the floor. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital while he followed closely behind, appearing shaken and distressed. Doctors worked to stabilize her, but internal bleeding had already caused severe damage. Her condition worsened quickly. Within 2 days, Margaret passed away. The official explanation pointed to injuries consistent with a fall. Given her age and recent dizziness, the conclusion seemed reasonable. Daniel organized the funeral swiftly. The service was small and subdued. He remained composed in public, thanking those who attended and accepting condolences with quiet dignity. After the burial, he avoided extended gatherings and returned home alone. Within weeks, paperwork began moving through banks and legal offices. Margaret's updated will transferred her house, savings, and insurance benefits to Daniel. Applications related to his residency status were also filed. Thomas, still grieving, felt unsettled. The speed of everything troubled him. His mother had seemed fragile, but her sudden death and the immediate financial changes felt too convenient. Uneasy and unable to ignore his instincts, he decided to look deeper into Daniel's past. The private investigator Thomas hired began by tracing Daniel's history before he arrived in Florida. What seemed at first like an ordinary background check slowly revealed troubling gaps. Daniel had moved frequently over the past 5 years, living in different states for short periods of time. In each location, he left little behind except brief connections and incomplete employment records. In Arizona, he had developed a close relationship with a widowed woman nearly twice his age. Financial records showed she had transferred large sums of money to him under the label of personal loans. Soon after those transfers, Daniel relocated without repaying anything. In Illinois, another older woman had reportedly become engaged to him, but the relationship ended suddenly. Friends of that woman described her as withdrawn and embarrassed afterward, unwilling to discuss what had happened. Immigration documents revealed even more concerning details. Daniel had previously filed paperwork connected to marriage-based residency, but both applications were withdrawn before completion. There were no clear explanations in the records. Thomas brought the investigators' findings to local authorities. Although suspicion alone was not enough for an arrest, it was enough to reopen Margaret's case. Prosecutors requested a second autopsy and a full toxicology review. The results changed everything. Margaret's body contained unusually high levels of a blood-thinning medication not originally prescribed to her. The dosage would have made even a minor injury far more dangerous. Investigators began to question whether Margaret's fall had truly been an accident or whether it had been carefully engineered. Once the toxicology report confirmed the presence of excessive blood-thinning medication, investigators shifted their focus entirely toward Daniel. Detectives began reviewing his financial records, phone activity, and purchase history from the months leading up to Margaret's death. What they discovered painted a troubling picture. Pharmacy logs revealed that Daniel had purchased high doses of anticoagulant medication using a slightly altered version of his name. Surveillance footage from the pharmacy showed him completing the transaction alone. The purchase occurred just weeks before Margaret's fatal fall. Medical experts later confirmed that the amount found in her system could not have been accidental. Bank statements showed a steady pattern of withdrawals and transfers after the wedding. Small amounts were moved from Margaret's savings into a joint account, and from there into a separate account controlled solely by Daniel. The transfers were subtle, designed to avoid raising immediate suspicion. At the same time, internet search history revealed inquiries about inheritance timelines, life insurance claim procedures, and the impact of spousal death on immigration status. Investigators also discovered that Daniel had contacted an immigration consultant shortly after Margaret updated her will. The timing suggested careful planning rather than coincidence. With this growing body of evidence, authorities moved quickly. Daniel was arrested at the house he had inherited only weeks earlier. He was charged with financial exploitation, fraud, and first-degree murder. The quiet neighborhood watched in disbelief as police escorted him away in handcuffs. The man once seen as a devoted caregiver was now at the center of a calculated criminal investigation. After Daniel's arrest, forensic specialists began a detailed examination of his electronic devices. His laptop and mobile phone were sent to a digital crimes unit, where technicians recovered deleted files and browsing history. What they uncovered suggested a level of planning far beyond what investigators had initially suspected. Stored in hidden folders were documents outlining timelines connected to Margaret's age, health condition, and financial assets. There were notes estimating how long immigration approval might take after a marriage to a U.S. citizen. Spreadsheets listed the value of her home, retirement funds, and insurance coverage. Dates were marked beside certain entries, aligning closely with changes made to her will. Search history revealed repeated research into blood-thinning medications, their side effects, and how internal bleeding could resemble injuries from a fall. There were also searches about how long specific substances remained detectable during autopsies. The pattern suggested careful study rather than casual curiosity. Even more disturbing was evidence that Daniel had already begun communicating online with another elderly woman from a neighboring state. Social media messages showed him presenting himself as single and seeking companionship. The communication began weeks before Margaret's death and intensified shortly afterward. Investigators concluded that Margaret had likely been part of a broader scheme. Marriage appeared to be a calculated strategy for financial gain and immigration stability. The digital trail connected the pieces in a way physical evidence alone could not. Prosecutors now had a powerful narrative: control, manipulation, financial exploitation, and a methodical plan designed to look like an accident. As the case moved toward trial, the weight of the digital evidence strengthened the charges against Daniel significantly. The trial drew intense public attention. News outlets filled the courtroom each day, and members of the community waited outside for updates. Prosecutors carefully presented the timeline, beginning with the whirlwind romance and ending with Margaret's death. They laid out financial records, pharmacy footage, immigration documents, and the recovered digital files from Daniel's laptop. Medical experts testified that the level of anticoagulant in Margaret's system could not have come from normal treatment. The dosage would have significantly increased the risk of severe internal bleeding from even a minor injury. Forensic specialists explained that her physical injuries were inconsistent with a simple accidental fall. The bleeding had progressed in a way that suggested vulnerability caused by medication. Financial analysts described the quiet transfers of money and the calculated restructuring of assets. They showed how Daniel positioned himself as the sole beneficiary within months of the marriage. Immigration officials confirmed that his visa was approaching expiration before he married Margaret, placing him under pressure to secure permanent status. The defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial, but the prosecution emphasized the pattern. The prior relationships, the research history, the secret medication purchase, and the immediate financial gains formed a connected chain. When the jury began deliberations, tension filled the courtroom. After several days, the verdict was delivered. Daniel was found guilty on all major charges, including first-degree murder and fraud. The sentence was life imprisonment without parole. As the judge finalized the ruling, the courtroom remained silent, absorbing the magnitude of what had been uncovered. After the sentencing, the house that once symbolized Margaret's long and peaceful life stood empty for months. Legal processes slowly transferred ownership back to her son, Thomas. Walking through the rooms again felt different. The familiar photographs and carefully arranged furniture now carried the weight of what had happened. The sense of comfort that once filled the home had been replaced by quiet reflection. The case gained national attention as details continued to surface in news reports and crime documentaries. Advocacy groups began using Margaret's story to warn elderly citizens about financial exploitation and emotional manipulation. Community centers organized seminars teaching seniors how to protect their assets and recognize warning signs in sudden relationships. What had once seemed like a private tragedy became part of a broader conversation about trust and vulnerability. Investigators later reviewed similar complaints in other states connected to Daniel's past. Although no additional murder charges were filed, several elderly women came forward describing financial losses and emotional deception. Their stories followed a similar pattern: charm, rapid commitment, financial access, and sudden disappearance. Thomas chose to speak publicly about his mother's life rather than only her death. He described her as generous, independent, and hopeful even in her later years. He emphasized that loneliness had made her vulnerable, not weakness. Daniel's conviction closed the legal chapter, but the emotional impact remained. The community learned how easily appearances can hide dangerous intentions. Behind what seemed like affection and devotion had been a calculated plan driven by greed. The shock did not come from a single act, but from how carefully it had been disguised as love.